Hello, everyone. In this lecture, we will talk about sampling in qualitative research in more details. Previously, in the introduction part of this course, we discussed two types of sampling in qualitative research. These were purposive or purposeful sampling, and we mentioned that this type of sampling is the researcher selects or recruits participants from the people or individuals who have experience in the topic or event under investigation. And the second type, which we mentioned previously, in this course is the convenience sampling, which means that the researcher selects participants from the people or the individuals who are readily accessible and available to the researcher. There are other types of sampling in qualitative research. And we will talk about these types of sampling in this lecture in more details. So by the end of this lecture, you will be able to differentiate between sampling in qualitative research and sampling in quantitative research. And we already discussed that in previous lecture, and we mentioned that in qualitative research we use non-probability sampling, and in quantitative research we use probability sampling. You will be able to identify approaches to sampling in qualitative research, as you will see throughout this lecture. Approaches to sampling in qualitative research can be classified into conceptually driven approaches and non-conceptually driven approaches to qualitative research sampling. The non-conceptually driven approaches, those approaches that do not have guiding principles, and as an example of those type of non-conceptually driven approaches to sampling in qualitative research are convenience sampling and opportunistic sampling. And the second approach, which is the conceptually driven approaches, which depends on concepts and particular criteria, are the purposive sampling and theoretical sampling. And the purposive sampling is the most common type of sampling that's used in qualitative research. And there are several types of purposive sampling that can be used in qualitative research, and you will be able to identify different types of purposive sampling, which is again a non-probability sampling, and it's classified also as a conceptually driven approach to sampling in qualitative research. For example, we will talk about maximum variation sampling and homogeneous sampling and snowball sampling as types or forms of purposive sampling in qualitative research. So, while quantitative studies often aim to maximize statistical power through the use of as large sample size as feasible, qualitative studies usually work with a small number of cases that are feasible to study in depth. Also, while subjects or cases in quantitative studies are stripped of their context, the smaller numbers involved in qualitative research allows exploration of the detail and richness of the data collected. So, in quantitative research, we are, or the researchers are aiming to have to increase the statistical power of their analysis. That's why they are seeking to obtain a large sample size as feasible to their study. However, in qualitative research, it's the number of participants is smaller than in quantitative research, and also the quantitative research, as we mentioned previously, it's a contextless research. However, in qualitative research, it's a contextual understanding of particular phenomenon or particular event. So sample sizes for qualitative research, it's vary by technique. So we may have in the literature different types of sampling techniques used in different traditions or types of qualitative research, whether it's a case study or grounded theory, phenomenology, and so on. But generally, in all of these traditions, generally the sample size in qualitative research is small. So, for example, a qualitative study might include just 2 or 3 focus groups, or a few, maybe dozen individual in-depth interviews. So the number clearly is fewer than number of participants in quantitative research. So also, as we mentioned previously, qualitative research involves non-probability sampling, where little attempt is made to generate a representative sample. And there are several common types. So we are talking about common types, and there are less common types of sampling in qualitative research. However, in textbooks and in the literature published or qualitative studies, the majority of studies or most common or most popular type of sampling that's used in qualitative research is a purposeful sampling, and a convenience sampling, and sometimes snowball sampling as well. But there are also several types of sampling that can be used in sampling techniques that can be used in qualitative research. So as we mentioned, one point to keep in your mind is that in qualitative research, there is a little attempt is made to generate a representative sample. So we are not aiming to obtain or to make generalization of our findings in qualitative research as the case in quantitative research. As we mentioned previously, we talked about 2 types of qualitative sampling, and we mentioned that they are non-probability sampling. Those are purposive sampling and convenience sampling. We may also be talking about snowball sampling. So purposive sampling, which means that the researchers choose participants arbitrarily for their unique characteristics or their experiences, attitudes, or perceptions regarding the topic under investigation. That's why it's called purposeful sampling, or sometimes they call it in the literature as judgmental sampling. We have convenience sampling also, which means that the researchers select any readily available individuals as participants in their research. And we have snowball sampling, which means that the participants refer researchers to others who have characteristics, experiences, or attitudes similar to or different from their own. So this is what we mean by snowball sampling. Those are 3 types of samplings, are, as we mentioned, the most common or most popular types of sampling that's used in qualitative research, but we also have other types that we will talk about them in details in this lecture. So we continue talking about the sampling process and qualitative research. So the sampling process is iterative and is expected to continue to develop and be refined during the research process. This is in contrast with demarcated or pre-planned sampling in quantitative research. So some researchers consider qualitative research or sampling in qualitative research as a cyclical or spiral process. So, analysis and interpretation of data collected after initial sampling in qualitative research feeds back to influence sampling methods and decisions regarding sample size during the research process. And as the research progresses and the sampling of additional data yields no further themes or ideas or concepts on the analysis, the point of data saturation is reached and sampling can cease or stop. So the point that we can conclude regarding this idea, which is the point of data saturation. So that's frequently or most of the time it's not possible to predict the sample size at the start of the study, at the start of qualitative study. So it's not possible most of the time to predict the number of participants or the sample size in qualitative research as we can make in quantitative research. So sometimes in the literature they say that an appropriate sample size for a qualitative research is the one that is adequately answers the research question, which implies that we reach or we get enough information or enough data regarding our research questions, and we reach to a point that we or the researchers cannot obtain new information or new knowledge regarding the phenomenon under investigation. So in this case, this can be considered as the appropriate sample size for the qualitative study. And again, I want to emphasize on the point that there is no you cannot predict the sample size at the start or at the beginning of a qualitative study. So, as you can see in this slide, we have two types of sampling techniques or sampling methods. We have probability sampling and non-probability sampling, and as we mentioned previously, the one that is associated with qualitative research is the non-probability sampling. So in non-probability sampling, a sample of participants or cases does not need to be representative or random, but a clear rationale is needed for the inclusion of some cases or individuals rather than others in the sample. A core characteristics of non-probability sampling techniques is that samples are selected based on the subjective judgment of the researcher rather than random selection. So, however, in probability sampling, every item or every individual in the population has an equal chance of being selected to be included in the sample. So what you need to know is that the one type of sampling that's associated with the qualitative research is the non-probability sampling, which depends on the subjective judgment of the researcher rather than random selection of participants as in quantitative research. So now we will start to talk about the approaches to sampling in qualitative research. Generally, there are different classifications in the literature regarding sampling in qualitative research. However, we can classify them, as you can see in the slide, into conceptually driven approaches and non-conceptually driven approaches, which means in the case of non-conceptually driven approaches, there are no specific guiding principles in in this sampling approach. So regarding conceptually driven approaches, we are talking about purposive and theoretical sampling. And we will talk about several types of purposive sampling or purposeful sampling in qualitative research. And regarding the non-conceptually driven approaches, which are, as we mentioned, have no guiding principles, and their sampling approach, we will talk about convenience and opportunistic sampling. And it's important to mention in this context that it's preferable and it's preferred in the literature or in performing any qualitative research to use a conceptually driven approaches, for example, as a purposive and theoretical sampling, comparing to using of non-conceptually driven approaches. And as we mentioned, we will talk about these types and details in the coming slides. As we mentioned in the previous slide, approaches to sampling in qualitative research fall into two broad categories, which are non-conceptually driven approaches and conceptually driven approaches. We'll start with the non-conceptually driven approaches, and we will start with the convenience sampling. In this approach, the potential participants, or let's say research settings or materials that are most easily accessible to the researcher are sampled or selected. This is type of sampling is the least rigorous sampling approach. And as we mentioned, it's one of the non-conceptually driven approaches that, which means that it does not have a guiding principles. That's why it can potentially compromise the research credibility and results in poor quality data. However, the main advantage of convenience sampling is that it's less expensive and time and effort intensive. Convenience sampling can be appropriate in the case of students' research, let's say, because it's less expensive. So again, convenience sampling, it's one type of non-probability sampling strategy that can be used in qualitative research. And we can say also that convenience sampling, it's one type of sampling that can also be used in quantitative research. So to draw a convenience sample, simply the researcher collects data from those people to which he or she has most convenient access. So sometimes in the literature, this type of sampling can be called or referred to as haphazard sampling, and this type of sampling is most useful in exploratory research. Which is clearly can be said as qualitative research, which is also an exploratory research. So the second type of non-conceptually driven approaches to sampling in qualitative research is the opportunistic sampling. This sampling method involves the researcher taking advantage of circumstances that occur as the study progresses, taking up emerging opportunities for data collection along the way. So it depends on what happens in the context or what happens in the research field. This is a flexible approach that lends itself to exploratory field research where little is known about the research setting. So the researcher may depend on the situations or events that happen during data collection and sample a new individuals or new participants during the research process, and this can be called as an opportunistic sampling. So an important note or point regarding the first two types of sampling and qualitative research, which can be classified under non-conceptually driven approaches and sampling and qualitative research, is that while there may be an element of convenience or opportunism in the sampling approach in many qualitative studies in the literature, it is generally accepted that sampling approaches that are conceptually driven are preferred. So the one that are conceptually driven and that we will discuss in the next slides are preferred in performing a qualitative research. So qualitative research, nothing is more important than making a proper selection of cases, or selecting the cases that can help in investigating the research problem or research question, what we mean by using or preferring the conceptually driven approaches that we will discuss next. So now we will start talking about the first type of conceptually driven approach to sampling and qualitative research, which is the most common type of sampling that's used in qualitative research, and it can be called also as a judgmental sampling technique. So it's one type of non-probability sampling method that can be used in qualitative research. This type of sampling involves the researcher deliberately and purposefully selecting the sample they believe can be the most fruitful in answering the research question. This selection process can be guided by consideration of the variables or qualities of potential participants that affect the contribution they could provide to the study. So, for example, you want to investigate a particular topic, and maybe you want to investigate the perceptions of physicians and the intensive care unit regarding communication with nurses. So you are going to select participants from who are physicians who are working in the intensive care unit, rather than any other unit in the hospital. The characteristics that or the variables that the researcher may choose to select the participants based on maybe simple characteristics or demographics such as age, gender, and socio-economic status, but can also include other aspects such as specific attitudes or beliefs regarding a particular topic. There are several types of purposeful or judgmental sampling that can be used in alone or in combination with each other. We have maximum variation sampling, deviant sampling, typical case sampling, homogeneous sampling, critical case sampling, confirming and disconfirming sampling, stratified, purposeful sampling, and snowball sampling. The most common of these is the snowball sampling technique. So the first type of purposeful sampling is the maximum variation sampling. This type of sampling, or this type of purposeful sampling, includes the recruitment of study participants who vary widely. That's why it's called maximum variation sampling. So the participants or the researchers seek to recruit participants who vary widely on the dimensions of interest with the aim of identifying central themes or elements that hold true across the diverse sample. So the sample is diverse in this case of sampling. So maximum variation sampling also sometimes can be referred to as heterogeneous sampling, is a purposeful or purposive sampling technique used to capture a wide range, that's why it's called maximum variation, a wide range of perspectives relating to the thing that the researcher interested in investigating or in studying. So maximum variation sampling is a search for variation in perspectives ranging from those conditions that are viewed to be typical through to those that are more extreme in nature. Okay? So the basic principle again behind maximum variation sampling is to gain greater insights into a phenomenon by looking at it from all angles. This type of sampling can often help the researcher to identify common themes that are evident across the sample. So, in contrast to maximum variation sampling, we have homogeneous sampling, which aims to select a group of cases with similar backgrounds and experiences, simplifying analysis and facilitating group interviewing. So a homogeneous purposive sample is one that is selected for having a shared characteristic or set of characteristics. Homogeneous sampling is used when the goal of the research is to understand and describe a particular group in depth. So, the second type of purposeful sampling in qualitative research is deviant, or sometimes it can be called as extreme case sampling. Deviant sampling involves the selection of extreme or outlying cases of the studied phenomenon, such as crises, exceptions, or remarkable failures or successes, in an attempt to glean as much information relevant to the research question as possible from each case. So, again, extreme or deviant case sampling is a type of purposive sampling that's used to focus on cases that are special or unusual. Typically in the sense that the cases highlight notable outcomes, failures, or successes, as we mentioned. So these extreme cases or deviant cases are useful because they often provide significant insights into a particular phenomenon, which can act as a lessons or let's say cases of best practice that guide future research and practice. So, in contrast to extreme or deviant case sampling that we discussed in the previous slide, another type of or form of purposive sampling is typical case sampling, which focuses on typical or average cases with the aim of building up a profile of a typical case. And in such type of sampling, general agreement on what constitutes a typical case is required for this approach. So, typical case sampling is a type of purposive sampling useful when a researcher wants to study a phenomenon or trend as it relates to what are considered typical or average members of the affected population. So, if a researcher, for example, wants to study how a type of educational curriculum affects the average student, then they choose to focus on average members of a student population. So, critical case sampling This type of purposeful sampling selects cases that will produce critical information with maximum generalizability of information to other cases. So, given that the researcher correctly identifies what makes a critical case, knowledge gained may be applied to other cases. So, again, critical case sampling, it's the process of selecting a small number of important cases that are likely to yield the most information and have the greatest impact on the development of knowledge regarding the studied topic. Also, to identify critical cases, the research team needs to be able to identify the dimensions that make a case critical. So, this type of research sometimes, or this type of sampling, case critical sampling, it can be used to test hypotheses by choosing the case that permits logical deductions of the type. If this is valid for this case, then it should apply to all cases. Or if it's not valid for this case, it's unlikely to be valid for any other cases. So such type of sampling, which is a critical case sampling, allows for logical generalization and maximum application of information to other cases, because if it's true of this one case, it's likely to be true of all other cases. So another type of purpose of sampling is confirming and disconfirming sampling, which involves the selection of a mixture of cases that tie in with expectations or findings up to that point in the study and cases which deviate from them. So, confirming to the findings up to this point in research process, and disconfirming to what we found up to this point in the research process. So, the confirming cases serve to add depth, detail, and enhance credibility, while the disconfirming cases challenge the prevalent narrative and may bring to light alternative interpretations. So, this approach is generally utilized at later stages of a study when the preliminary fieldwork has already established what qualifies as a confirming case. So, identification. So, this type of sampling, of purposive sampling, which is confirming and disconfirming sampling, includes identification of confirming and disconfirming cases. And this type of sampling happens after some portion of data collection and analysis has already been completed. So it includes selecting cases that are either serve as additional examples that lend further support, richness, and depth to the patterns emerging from data analysis, and these are the confirming cases, and other cases that serve as examples that do not fit emergent patterns and allow the research team to evaluate rival explanations, and these can be called as a disconfirming cases. So this type of sampling can help the research team understand and define the limitations of research findings. So another type of purposeful sampling that can be used in qualitative research is stratified purposeful sampling. In this type of sampling, the researcher selects participants from specific subgroups of the population of interest, enabling easier comparison of the variation across subgroups. This type of sampling is similar to stratified random sampling that's used in quantitative research. So, in order to obtain a stratified purposeful sample, the sampling frame is first divided into strata, Then a purposeful sample is selected from each stratum. This type of sampling or such a sampling design can help or facilitate group comparisons. So the last type of purposeful sampling that we will discuss in this lecture is snowball sampling, which can be referred to as friend of a friend or network sampling, or sometimes as a chain referral sampling. So such type of sampling involves identification of participants by a technique known as snowballing, whereby initially identified participants are asked to suggest other possible candidates. And this type of sampling is especially useful when the studied population is hard to access and or may not publicly signal that they belong to the group of interest, for example, such as drug users. So such type of sampling can be used for a phenomenon that's or to study a particular people who have stigma regarding particular behavior, such as we mentioned, drug users. And in such case, the researcher cannot find those people or those individuals easily. So snowballing technique can be one method to facilitate sampling in such cases. So in this type of sampling, the researchers initially contact a few potential respondents and then ask them whether they know of anybody with the same characteristics that they are looking for in their research. So one research participant refers another, and that person refers another, and that person refers another. Thus, a chain of potential participants is identified. That's why it's called sometimes the snowball sampling as a chain referral sampling. So again, in this type of sampling, a researcher might know of one or two people she or he would like to include in her or his study, but then depends on those initial participants to help identify additional study participants. Thus, the researcher's sample builds and becomes larger as the study continues, much as a snowball builds and becomes larger as it rolls through the snow.